First of all, good Woche. Can I know how to... The Baditchev Rebbe, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Baditchev, and the Alter Rebbe made a chasana together. The Alter Rebbe's granddaughter married the Baditchev Rebbe's grandson. And they made the wedding in a little village that's called Zlobin. Zlobin was exactly halfway between Liadi and Baditchev, because the Alter Rebbe didn't want the wedding to be in Liadi. That would mean the Baditchev would have to travel. The Baditchev Rebbe didn't want to make the wedding in Liadi, because that would mean that the Alter Rebbe would have to travel, so they both traveled to a little tiny village called Zlobin. And hundreds and thousands of Hasidim from the Alter Rebbe and from the Baditchev Rebbe came to the Chassaneh. So the story is told that early one morning, the Baditchev Rebbe was sitting on the veranda, on the porch in the home where he was staying, and he was holding a glass of tea, a glass. And he saw Hasidim coming in hordes. He saw many Hasidim. And the Baditchev Rebbe, as we know, had an incredible ahava, had an incredible love for Yidden. And he said very emotionally, very excitedly, "Ah Yidden, ah Yidden." And he said, "Ah Yidden," he clenched his fists. And the glass which was in his hand cracked. And there was a chassid who had to pull the little pieces of glass out of his hand. So the first thing is, can I know how to, as Eifel mentioned, this alone is an incredible thing. So many Yiddish kinder came together in 770 is an incredible schus. It's a wonderful thing. In the olden days, when people would go into Yechidus, they would write down what the Rebbe said. They would go out of the Rebbe's room, they would take a pen and a paper and write down what the Rebbe told them. And after they wrote down the content of the Yechidus, they would send it into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would actually correct it. The Rebbe would actually edit it, fix it. So it was a Bocher, this happened in the mid-1970s, in the Tafshan Lameds, a Bocher, an Israeli Bocher had a Yechidus. And in the middle of the Yechidus, the Rebbe started to cough terribly. The Rebbe started to cough very heavily. So when he wrote down, when he transcribed the exchange that he had with the Rebbe in his room, he wrote on his paper, "Kan hishtoel ha-Rebbe harbe." Here the Rebbe coughed a lot. That's what he wrote on the paper. "Kan hishtoel ha-Rebbe harbe." Here the Rebbe coughed. And he sent it into the Rebbe. The Rebbe crossed out the words, "Kan hishtoel ha-Rebbe harbe," and he wrote instead, "Kan hoyu halomes ve'esteirim rabim," which translates in English, here there were blockages, there were obstacles, there were problems. Implying that when the Rebbe coughed, he wasn't just coughing because he had something in his throat, he was coughing because he was having some kind of a hardship. I know a woman, she told me the story herself, that she didn't have any children. And the doctors told her that she should adopt children, she'll never have children. So she had a Yechidus by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told her to go to a different country, and that she should go to the doctors in that other country, and the Mitzvah Shem shall have children. So she went to this other country, and she went to see the doctors, and the doctors told her that she should think about adoption, because she's never going to have children. So in her next Yechidus, she went into the Rebbe, they were shluchim. So she wrote on the zettel that the doctor says she's not going to have children. And the Rebbe ignored it. And the following year, they went into Yechidus again, and they wrote on the zettel that the doctor said they're never going to have any children. The Rebbe ignored it. After a few years, they went to their head shliach, their mashpia, and said, "What are we supposed to do? We keep writing on the note that we don't have no children, and the doctors are not giving us any hope, and the Rebbe is ignoring it." So the shliach told them that the next year, if they go into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe ignores this part of the letter, the wife, the missus, should say to the Rebbe that there's a mention about the fact that they have no children. So they went into Yechidus, and of course the Rebbe ignored this part of the zettel, so the wife, she told me the story herself, apologized to the Rebbe for her boldness, for her forwardness, and she said to the Rebbe, "We wrote in the note that we have no children, and the doctors are not giving us any hope we'll ever have children." So the Rebbe started coughing. And she had 7 children. Now her children say the Rebbe coughed 7 times, but she says she doesn't know how her children know that because she doesn't remember how many times the Rebbe coughed. But so when the Rebbe coughs, it has more than one meaning. I read in a book that next door to the Rebbe, if you've ever been to the Rebbe's house, if you face the Rebbe's house, the house on the left, which now belongs to a non-Jew, used to belong to the Boston Rebbe. And he tells a story how he can go up onto the roof of his house and look into the window where the Rebbe was sitting and learning all night. So he says that he would look into the Rebbe's window and the Rebbe was constantly coughing. A whole night the Rebbe was coughing, sitting and learning and coughing. So I repeated this to one of the Rebbe's people, one of the people who worked with the Rebbe closely. So he says, Narena, don't you understand the reason the Rebbe was coughing was because he was being looked at. The Rebbe was very sensitive and he felt that his space was being invaded. And as a result of the fact that someone was eyeing him, it had this impression, had this effect. Now why am I telling you these things? I'm telling you these things because I want to impress upon you the idea that when there is a meeting between two people, the meeting happens on different levels. You may know this from your own personal experience. A person walks into a room, a stranger, you never met him before. And as soon as the person walks into the room, you get uncomfortable, you get nervous. Hasn't said a word, didn't walk in abruptly, didn't do anything extreme. You just sense this person, not good. On other occasions, a person walks into a room, they don't say a word, and you feel very comfortable, very at peace. You can meet strangers on the bus going to camp, coming to New York to go to school. Sometimes you meet a stranger and you immediately feel that this is a person you could be a friend with. Sometimes you meet a person and you just feel like it's not going to work. You haven't exchanged words. The reason for this is because every person, in addition to what we say and what we reason and what we feel, we have a certain energy, a certain feel. And when people sit next to each other, when people are together in a room, they feel each other. They sense one another. And often you don't have to exchange any words, just being in proximity to somebody else, and you get a certain feeling, get a certain sense. Now regular people experience this feeling and don't usually know what it means. They don't know how to interpret it. They don't know if they should trust their feelings. Very sensitive people, very deep people, very edele people meet a person and they not only have a sense of what that person is, but they trust that the way they assess, the way they're appreciating that person is credible, it's true, it's real. This is what Hasidim call makifim. Makif. Makif is the levels of your neshama that don't have a place in your body. Your neshama is in your mind. Your ruach is in your heart. Your nefesh is in your liver or in your arms and legs. The higher levels of the neshama, what the Zayar calls the neshama of the neshama, nishmasa li nishmasa, does not have a place in your body, but it's yours. And this neshama li neshama, which you cannot control, and you don't even know exactly what it is very much a part of you. It's your makif. And when you sit next to another person, your makif and their makif circle. It's like two atoms. They come close enough together, the electrons circle, they become one. When you're in the presence of another person, you and that person share a space. And just to make life interesting for you, you know what we call that in Torah? You know what we call that makif? We call that makif a chuppah. A chassan and a kala stand under a chuppah. There's the chassan's chuppah, and there's the kala's chuppah, and then there's the chuppah of the chassan and the kala together. Two people sit next to each other, there's a chuppah. You're not touching physically, but the neshama of one and the neshama of the other are touching. When Hasidim went in to the Rebbe, to Yechidus, it says in the Sichos that Yechidus was a meeting of Nefesh b'Nefesh, Ruach b'Ruach, Neshama b'Neshama, Chaya b'Chaya, and Yechida b'Yechida. In plain words, you talk to the Rebbe talks to you. It's a communication. In plain words, you have feelings for the Rebbe has feelings for you. You demonstrate your feelings to the Rebbe demonstrates his feelings to you. You have thoughts, you have ideas, you have beliefs, you have understandings. And you can share your ideas with the Rebbe can share his ideas with you. That's Nefesh, and that's Ruach, and that's Neshama. But that's where it stops. When it comes to the levels of Chaya and Yechida, we don't know what's going on. But the Rebbe does. If you want to understand why Hasidim treated Yechidus so earnestly, why Hasidim, the Alter Rebbe's Hasidim, who were compared to us not human, they were angels, could prepare for Yechidus for years. It was because there was an understanding that when they're going into the Rebbe's Cheder, it's not a meeting of a person and a person. It's a meeting of a neshama and a neshama. And we know only very small parts of our neshama. We don't know all of our neshama. The Rebbe knows all of our neshama. And when we enter into the Rebbe's room, we don't know the full experience of Yechidus. And the Rebbe does. We experience the Yechidus only on a conscious level. The subconscious, the deeper levels of what's happening. When a Chassid and a Rebbe are in the same space, we're not able to understand, to process, because we're not sensitive enough. So a Chassid prepares, and he hopes that when he enters into the Rebbe's space, he will have prepared himself sufficiently that a little bit of the deeper and higher senses of what transpired when a Chassid and a Rebbe are together in the same space should touch him, should reach him, and he should be able to take it along with him. This is Yechidus. Now girls, I don't like to tell people things that I myself am not holding by. I don't like to tell people things that I am not in the madrege of living. So I'm going to tell it you the way I see it and feel it. I'm much older than you. But I never had a Yechidus, physically. My bar mitzvah was Tafshin Lamed Ches. My bar mitzvah was the year the Rebbe wasn't well. And as a result, I didn't have a bar mitzvah Yechidus. The bar mitzvah, I remember as a 9.5-year-old going with my family into Yechidus. That was the last time I remember Yechidus. I remember Yechidus Klolis when I got married, when I was on Shlichus, I had Yechidus. But to go into the Rebbe's room and to be alone in the Dal Damas of the Rebbe is almost as foreign to me as it is to you. But I'll tell you a number of things that I heard from people who had Yechidus, and not big people, little people, small, simple people. Because we are small, simple people. There's a young man, a Lubavitcher, born and bred in Crown Heights, who's just a few years older than I am, maybe 5 years older than I am, who told me a very interesting thing. In those days, the Seder was that every bacher, from the time he was 14, until bar mitzvah, he went in with his family. When he had a bar mitzvah, he went in with his parents. From the age of 14, every bacher went into the Rebbe alone for Yechidus every single year for his birthday. And a younger man told me that he remembers being 14 years old and walking into the Rebbe's room and the Rebbe getting up for him. When you walked into the Rebbe's room, the Rebbe got out of his seat just a little bit. He didn't stand up, he raised himself. And at the end of the Yechidus, when you were stepping back out of the room, the Rebbe would raise himself again. And Hasidim would say that the significance of this raising himself when you entered and raising himself again when you departed is connected to a vart from the Rebbe Marash. The Rebbe Marash used to have Yechidus, and he would perspire, he would sweat terribly. He would sweat so much that sometimes in one night of Yechidus, they had to change his surtuk, they changed his kapota 3 times. So somebody once said to the Rebbe Marash, Rebbe, you sit in the desk, people come in and out, what's so exhausting? Why are you so perspiring? Why do you get so tired? Why do you sweat so much? It's just people coming in, talking to you and leaving. So the Rebbe Marash said, imagine you have to get dressed and undressed 20 times in an hour. Put on clothes and take them off, put on clothes and take them off, over and over again. It's tiring. Says the Rebbe, when a chassid walks in, I have to go into that chassid. And when the chassid leaves, I have to depart from that chassid and go into the next chassid. And he said in Yiddish, the ständige halbosha nafshata, the repeated act of entering into a chassid and then departing from that chassid and going into the next chassid is exhausting. So I remember hearing this as a child, that when a chassid walked into the Rebbe and the Rebbe stood, just a drop, it's like a heben, it was going into you. And when you would walk out, the Rebbe would raise himself again, that was the Rebbe going out of you. So this young man said to me, it was very, very disturbing, very unnerving. A 14-year-old little boy walked into the Rebbe. And the Rebbe said, "Give my heb." The Rebbe got up for him, just a little bit. So this Bacher told me as follows. You walk into Yechidus, the first thing that you see is the Rebbe's table is clear. There's no books, there's no papers, there's no unfinished business. It's clear. The only thing on the table is glasses and a pencil, maybe a pad. And Yechidus could be a minute, 60 seconds, sometimes less. But the feeling you got when you walked into the Rebbe's room for Yechidus was that you were absolutely the only thing on his mind. When you were in his presence, he was with you completely. The Yechidus can last an instant, but the idea that the Rebbe gave you such quality time for that few seconds that you would stand in the Rebbe's room and the Rebbe would read your note. And I'll describe how the Rebbe would read a note. The Rebbe would wear glasses, spectacles, reading glasses. And the Rebbe didn't use a pen, the Rebbe used a pencil. The Rebbe would take your note and he would take his pencil and he would twirl it. He would twirl it so that he was seeing one line of your letter at a time. That's how the Rebbe would do it here. And periodically the Rebbe would take his pencil and make a mark. After the Rebbe finished reading your note, he would put down the paper and his pencil. He would take off his glasses and he would talk to you. And from what I understand, the Rebbe Bechlal didn't look at you when he talked to you. And I can tell you this, I can tell you why. Because if the Rebbe looked at you, you couldn't possibly look back. The Rebbe's eyes were like the sun. They burned through you. And the Rebbe would read your note, they'd take off his glasses, and he would talk to you. A lady I know told me that you could stand outside the Rebbe's room for hours. And you were so nervous. You were just so uptight. And you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to go into the Rebbe, I'm such a wreck. How am I going to be there? How am I going to pay attention? How am I going to listen? How am I going to respond? How am I going to remember? And you would stand in the hallway so uptight, so nervous, so apprehensive. And sometimes you waited and waited and waited till there were no nerves left. You would step across the threshold of the Rebbe's door, and there was a very, very strange peace in that space. And when you were in the Rebbe's Daled Amos, there was an incredible presence. The Rebbe brought you into his space in such a way that you were able to be there with him. He brought you into his little sphere. And for the duration of the Yechidus, your calm, your complete clarity and focus was an extension of his. And you were able to be completely there. In spite of the fact that in the minutes leading up to the Yechidus, you were so nervous. I know a man who never learned in a yeshiva. He's a Baal Tshuva, never learned in a yeshiva. And his Kala also never learned in a yeshiva. They got married in 1977. I used to learn with him in yeshiva many years ago in California. So he told me that when he had to get married, his shliach, Rabbi Levitansky Alav Shalom, arranged a Yechidus that should go into the Rebbe. And he was really uninitiated. He didn't learn in 77. He wasn't around. He came for the Yechidus. He says, I went into the Rebbe's room. And you understand, we all are afraid of the Rebbe for some foolish reason. He didn't know you're supposed to be afraid of the Rebbe. He said, I went into the Rebbe's room. And the Rebbe's room was all love. This was his feeling. The Rebbe's room was all love. He felt in the Rebbe's cheder all there is ahava. Here's what I want to say to you girls as you're going into the Rebbe's room. In my opinion, it really doesn't matter what you do there. You'll say Tillim, you read it settle, you'll think about yourself, but family members. What matters is, in that space, it's a holy space. And it's a holy space not just because it's said in books that it's a holy space. It's a holy space because you will feel that it's a holy space. Just like when you go to the Ohel, just like when you go to the Ohel, you go into the Ohel, doesn't matter how many people are there, doesn't matter how cold or hot it is, when you are in the Ohel, you sense that you are in an embrace, you are in a warm place, you are in a holy place. When you go into the Rebbe's room, when you stand in the Rebbe's Daled Amos, you will feel, you don't have to take my word for it, you will feel that you are in a holy space. This is really disturbing me. I hate to say this to you. I'm sorry. Ich verstehe. It's very, very important for you girls. The few seconds, I don't know how much time they give you in the Rebbe's room. And 1 minute. I just want to say to you, this is a tangent. You're not going to the Ohel tonight, but you've been to the Ohel and you're going to be to the Ohel. Going to the Ohel is only one rule. You can't be in a rush. You can take the bus there, but you can't worry about getting the bus back. You go to the Ohel, you have to have as much time as you need. They're giving you a minute, but there's plenty of times that you can go to the Ohel and stand all day. What's the most important thing is that when you're in the Rebbe's cheder, you should be there. Don't think about where you were before. Don't think where you're going to later. Be with the Rebbe in that space. It doesn't matter if you don't think anything. It doesn't matter if you don't say anything. You could think, you should think, and you should speak. But the most important thing, when you're in the Rebbe's room, make sure you're there. What that means is as follows. Unfortunately, as it stands this minute, the Rebbe is not going to talk to you. He's not going to smile at you. He's not going to get up for you. At least you're not going to see. But the meeting of a neshama and a neshama is a very real thing. We are not neshama people. We're an kleine menschelach. We're very small. But we have neshamas. And the way we have some connection to our neshama is if we relax. If we could be quiet. Quiet, I don't mean not screaming. I mean quiet in our thoughts, quiet in our emotions. Be present. In the Rebbe's room, understand that this is a meeting of a neshama and a neshama that's very real. Your neshama is meaning the neshama of the Nasi Hadar, the neshama close the Rebbe, the Nasi Hadar. And it's very elementary, it's very important that you should be present for this meeting. And that you should be able to take from this meeting a sense that in the minute that you stood in that cheder and you were quiet, you felt some kind of connection to the Rebbe that you could take with you. And I want to finish with a couple of more thoughts. It's very, very late. I am very sensitive to that. I just want to say a few more things. Quite recently, there's an organization called Oyer V'Choim that does good stuff, and I get from them every day a nugget, a goodie from the Rebbe. So recently they sent around a thought. A Yid wrote the Rebbe a letter. A Yid wrote the Rebbe a letter. And he writes to the Rebbe that he wants to become the Rebbe's chassid. But he says to the Rebbe, I feel I'm going to become your chassid, but I'm going to be your chassid out of fear, because the Rebbe has such teikif. The Rebbe has such strength, the Rebbe has such hardness, the Rebbe has such power, that the sense that I feel in the Rebbe's presence is gevura, so the relationship I'm going to have with the Rebbe is fear. And the Rebbe answers this man. And the Rebbe says to him, I don't understand. I have no teikif. There's no hardness, there's no toughness, there's no gevura. And Bechlal, the Rebbe says, I never even tell people what to do. I simply make suggestions. I want you to understand something which I don't understand. And I don't understand it because my experience with the Rebbe is the teikif of the Rebbe. It's important for you to understand, and it's important for me to understand, that in the Rebbe there is somehow a shiluv, there is a bringing together of an incredible ahava. The Rebbe loves every Yid in a very, very, very real, palpable way. And the Rebbe loves every chassid, and he loves each one of us and each one of you in a very fatherly way, in a very paternal way. Somehow the fact that the Rebbe pushes us and drives us and demands of us and says that whatever we do is inadequate is not offsetting, is not a contradiction to the idea that the Rebbe is a father, a loving Rebbe. And it's very important that you appreciate not just the teikif of the Rebbe, the strength of the Rebbe, the demands of the Rebbe, but that you equally appreciate the fact that the Rebbe loves and accepts you for the person that you are. And the Rebbe has emunah in you. And he only wishes that you should just be the best you that you could possibly be. That as good as you are in your relationship with the Eibush and the Rebbe, you should constantly grow. You should constantly become better and greater. And I'm going to finish with a story that you probably know, but I'm going to tell it anyway because it's good to always finish with a story, because this at least you'll remember. When the Rebbe wasn't well, they wanted to take the Rebbe to the hospital. You all know that. They wanted to take the Rebbe to the hospital. And the Rebbe did not want to go. He really didn't want to go. And the Rebbe made it very clear that if they're taking him, it's going to be against his wishes. And when you break the Rebbe's will, it's a terrible, terrible thing. One of the many people that Rebbe argued with that night about going to the hospital was Dr. Feldman, who was a doctor here in Crown Heights. He, like so many others, went into the Rebbe and tried to reason with the Rebbe. The Rebbe needs to go to the hospital. And the Rebbe said, we're going to make the hospital here. And he said to Dr. Feldman, he says, Dr. Feldman, you see these walls? You see these books? And the Rebbe pointed at his room. He says, these walls and these books have absorbed the tears and the pain of thousands of Jews. They will heal me. A woman once walked into the Rebbe to Yechidus, and she complained about her life. She had tzaras. And the Rebbe listened to her. And she was finished with all her complaints. The Rebbe said to her, Los dein pekel da. Leave your pain, leave your suffering here, and go out of this room and live your life without burden, without guilt, without schlepping around your past. So she said to the Rebbe, Rebbe, you have so many peklach of so many Yidden, you don't need my pekel. So the Rebbe said to her, there are so many peklach in this room already, one more pekel, I won't even notice it. Go into the Rebbe's room, leave your peklach, and take from there joy and betochen and a koyach for avoida, which will translate into Hatzlacha. Larichas Yom V'Shanim Tevis. Okay, a gute Nacht, a gute Woche.